everybody! In today's video, we're going to be talking about the reflection-based terrain diamond and how people at that terrain are coping with the current coronavirus situation. And some of you may have already seen the previous video we made about how people at the order-based terrain square are coping with the coronavirus situation. And we really highly recommend that you go back and watch that video if you haven't seen it yet. You can see it here. Because everything that we're going to say about people at diamond is going to make much more sense if you already understand about people at square. Because people at diamond are often acting in reaction to people at square. So we really suggest that you watch that video first.
There's a range of responses that are happening at diamond, and because it's an individual terrain, there's everything from boosting your immune system to finding ways to increase your vibration, to breath work, to technology applications. But the thing that's important to recognize here is that everybody is finding their own individual path to be self-reliant, to find a solution that really serves their own inner sense of safety rather than relying on the group as a method of feeling safe.
Yeah, because really at diamond, people are relying on themselves, their own ingenuity, their own knowledge, their own thinking, their own understanding, rather than relying on the external system of the collective. That's the key difference between diamond and square that we're seeing playing out here. So square is the mainstream, it's how the masses are responding. So people at square are tending to happily comply with the restrictions and the lockdown regulations because they believe that if everybody acts together, they can stop the spread of the virus and keep the collective safe. The sense of safety at square comes from feeling like the system is looking after you, like you're part of a smoothly running system. In contrast, the sense of safety at diamond, at the reflection-based terrain, comes from a belief that the mind will keep you safe. And by the mind, we mean knowledge, ingenuity, innovation, research. So one of the things we really want to explain about diamond is that it's very different from the terrain before it, the order-based terrain, and the terrain after it, the connection-based terrain, circle. Square and circle are both what we call collective terrains. So the focus is on the group. Whereas at diamond is an individualistic terrain. So everybody at diamond really thinks for themselves and identifies themselves as a highly unique individual. So you're going to have different identities at diamond, you're going to have different solutions that people are bringing to the virus crisis, but you're also going to have very different interpretations of the situation coming from people at diamond. And it's at diamond that we start to see questioning of the official narrative. We start to see lots of different explanations for what's causing the virus, rather than just believing everything that they see on the news, which is what happens at square. At diamond, people are questioning. Firstly, because at diamond anyway, people tend to question authority because they like to think for themselves and they're very much in reaction to square. So they tend to always be a little bit suspicious of what they're hearing in the mainstream narrative. But also because people at diamond value their own uniqueness. So they're going to want to come up with their own way of seeing it. And so you start to see a lot of different stories and explanations for, is there a virus? Isn't there a virus? Is it really 5G? Is it this? Is it that? And that's why we're hearing so many different stories coming from people at diamond. So because people at diamond are very much about their identity, I'm a spiritual person, or I'm an artist, or I'm a cultural creative, or I'm a radical thinker, or I'm an innovator, or I'm an actress. But they're all pushing the envelope in some innovative way, somehow within themselves, depending on their personality type and which identity they've chosen for themselves. People at diamond can be very passionate about their beliefs, because at this terrain, the beliefs become part of the identity. So if your identity is as a truther or someone who's like a bullshit detector who sees the truth that the media aren't telling you, and you spend all your time coming up with theories of the truth and what's really going on and the powers that be and everything, you're going to be very attached to those beliefs because they've actually become part of your identity. In contrast, if your belief is that it's all about vibration and you're a spiritual person and it doesn't matter what's happening in the virus, all you've got to do is raise your vibration and be in a state of love, you're going to be very attached to those beliefs. So one of the things we're witnessing as we're watching the reactions from people at the reflection-based terrain diamond is that there's a wide variety of beliefs, but they're all very passionately held.
And one thing that we really want to reinforce is that people are where they are at their terrain based on the bundle of charge that they're holding. And at Diamond, there is a great deal of passion and charge for their identity, for their beliefs and their knowledge. And when you combine their beliefs and their identity, you really have a very charged bundle that is causing them to want to be heard amongst the others. And so you see a cacophony of voices that are rising up, wanting to basically get more prominence in the noise of what's being said, because it's like, no, my beliefs and my identity need to be reinforced, so you need to hear this. No, but my identity and my beliefs need to be reinforced. And so this is what's very interesting to watch, is that we've got on YouTube now such a wide range of personalities and voices at Diamond that are really emphasizing what they believe to be true in this situation.
And what is also really interesting about all those voices is what they have in common is that most of them don't agree with the mainstream narrative in some way or other. Would you say?
Yeah, well, that's true.
Most, not all of them, but most.
Well, they're certainly pushing back against what they feel is the mainstream narrative. So one of the interesting things to notice is that the community on YouTube is being very vocal, the Diamond community at YouTube, about the issue of censorship. There's been on social media now a real push to censor anything that's not of the official narrative. And there's a great deal of uprising occurring amongst various Diamond voices that are being censored because they're disagreeing with the official narrative. They're trying to find alternatives to explain things. And of course, because these platforms are owned by the official narrative, they are not wanting these alternatives to be considered. So it's quite interesting to witness this, where in past times, when you had a few channels that gave the official narrative, everybody was getting the same message. But because our civilization is more at Diamond now than ever, there is a lot of alternative listening. There's people looking for other solutions, other explanations, other reasons for why things are happening. And so there's a lot of attention being given to all of these other possibilities. And this is actually making the people that are holding the official narrative very uncomfortable, because they're losing the narrative. And so what we're seeing is a tug of war between Diamond trying to assert a range of narratives that each of which they want to hold as the truth, against Square's official narrative. So we're seeing a real tug of war happening, and it's quite interesting to watch. And the censorship issue has been quite alarming, because we value in our democracy freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and at Diamond we're really dealing with freedom of expression. And so when expression is being censored, alternative expression is being censored, it's very alarming.
But also, do you remember, those of you who saw the previous video when we talked about Square, the deep fear that people in the mainstream at Square have of those that say at Pyramid, the previous terrain to Square, the will-based terrain, that they're just going to do whatever they want and grab all the food and look after themselves and infect other people and not care about the community and not care about infection. And so people at Square have set up these systems and the regulations and the rules to keep the collective safe from the rebels and the renegades. Well, the people at Square are very much in reaction to people at Pyramid. The same thing is happening at Diamond. People at Diamond are very much in reaction to Square. And the deep fear that runs beneath the surface of everyone at Diamond is the fear of Square in its shadow. Just like I just talked about Square people being afraid of Pyramid in its shadow, which is selfishness and every man for himself. Diamond is afraid of Square in its shadow, and the shadow of Square is totalitarianism. So people at Diamond at the moment, I have a lot of friends at Diamond who are very, very frightened that their liberties are going to be taken away, that the government is going to control everything indefinitely, that we're going to lose our rights and freedoms. And there's a huge amount of charge around this and a huge amount of agitation around this. And in some ways, The fear of totalitarianism, the fear of the square shadow that people at Diamond are facing is just as big as the fear that the people at Square have of the virus, because it's a fear of something outside yourself that you can't control. And at Square, the fear is that there's a virus that's going to harm the herd, and at Diamond, or there's rebels at Pyramid that are going to be so selfish that everyone in the herd dies. At Diamond, there's a fear that the herd is going to become so militant and so rigidly controlled that we're all going to lose our rights and freedoms, and we're going to end up in a George Orwellian nightmare like in the book 1984. And I know a lot of people at Diamond of all different political and spiritual persuasions who are really, really nervous about what's happening on our planet because of this deeply seated fear that people at this terrain have of losing freedom and of being controlled by the system to the point where there's no more choice.
And this control is evident, unfortunately. Governments, Square institutions, are really looking to assert and retain and maintain the control that they have historically had. And as we, as a collective consciousness, are at Diamond now, finding our way individually, these liberties are being constrained and stripped and boxed and basically compressed in order for Square to feel like it hasn't lost control. So there is a legitimate fear amongst Diamond of being constrained, because they're looking for more freedom, more liberty, more expansion, more expression. And Square is very much frightened by this, and so it is really, really fighting back.
So Alan's been pointing out that there are so many different viewpoints and opinions at Diamond, and all the YouTubers and all the information out there. One of the reasons that is possible at this moment in history is because as a collective in the Western world, we are at Diamond. So regardless of whether your individual terrain is Pyramid or Square or Diamond or Circle or Toroid or Infinity, as a collective in the Western world at the moment, the prevailing terrain is at Diamond. Yes, there are a few countries still at Square moving to Diamond, but overall, the Western world is at Diamond. And that's why we have the situation we have with the internet and all the different perspectives and ideas and theories and philosophies that are being mooted on the internet. If we were still in a Square world and somebody invented the internet would be fully run by the government. There would be only one version of the truth disseminated on that platform, because it would be a centralized system. But because the internet is thriving in an era where we as a collective are at Diamond, information has been decentralized. Everything is about customization and individualization and individual opinions, individual beliefs. So everybody has got their own theories and their own expertise. And as a result of this, there are so many differing opinions out there that in actual fact, it can be quite overwhelming. Whereas if you're someone at Square, you're probably just going to watch the mainstream news and read the mainstream newspapers, and you're going to get one version of the coronavirus, and it's going to be fairly easy to digest that information. If you're at Diamond or Circle or Spiral or Toroid or anywhere past Square, then you're probably noticing that you're being bombarded by so many different opinions and so many different versions of the truth. And then it becomes about discernment. Which is the truth? Which is the real truth? Which truth resonates with me? And that can become an overwhelming process. And when someone is at the reflection-based terrain Diamond and their beliefs are very tied in with their identity, there can be a lot of charge about which beliefs are true. And it can be a very confusing time and a very overwhelming time. Whereas, for example, someone maybe at Toroid or Infinity will have a much more direct and permanent connection to their infinite self, and will have a much more instant knowing of truth. At the reflection-based terrain at Diamond, the information is being filtered through the mind. So there's correlation against other sources, and there's discussion, and there's debate, and it can be exhausting and it can be overwhelming. And that is one of the challenges of being at the reflection-based terrain at this point in time, when the prevailing terrain is at Diamond and there's so many competing versions of the truth out there. It can be very confusing.
And I think maybe one way to look at this is this idea that, as Tahnee's mentioned, at Square, people, in order to keep order within themselves, need to just limit the narrative to one focus, to one voice, to one source.
To the official source.
To the official source. As you move to Diamond, you've got this widening to all manners of conversation, and it becomes confusing because you haven't yet developed the compass to know which of these to necessarily discern as you would when you become more expanded. That then comes back to, again, one narrative, but it's your narrative, the narrative that you've come to know be true through an introspective process, where here at Diamond you're dealing from an outer reflected process of distillation, and you're having to try and correlate and condense all of this information, and it becomes quite confusing.
Whereas at Square, which is where the mainstream is living, it's a much simpler task. Like that lady you were saying that you met at the post office.
There was someone at the post office, to echo this idea that I was sharing with Tahnee, that had been saying when we were standing in line that she was just hearing all these different points of view, and just said, well, I'm just, even of the different Sky News and the various channels that are out in the public space, she just said, oh, I'm just going to only listen to the one ABC, which is the government news channel.
But even though people at Diamond are facing some challenges because they do have this level of fear about totalitarianism, about their rights being taken away, at the same time, a lot of people at Diamond are actually coping with this crisis a little bit more easily than people at Square are. Because as we talked in the previous video, people at Square deep down are very scared of change. And this situation is throwing their whole lives into complete chaos. People at Diamond are much more comfortable with chaos. They're much more comfortable with change. In fact, they thrive on change because Diamond is all about progress and innovation. And it's all about taking the square and pushing it over into a diamond. So people at Diamond are all about finding new ways to do things. So what we're seeing amongst people we know at Diamond is that they're not sitting at home accepting government handouts and waiting until things go back to normal and they can go back to their job. I mean, some of them are, but the vast majority of people we know at Diamond are actually going, okay, this is the situation. I can't do my normal work. What can I do? And they're innovating. They're finding ways to keep making money. They're finding new ways to run their businesses. Some of them may be accepting government handouts, but they're not relying on them exclusively. They're thinking outside the box because that's what people at this terrain tend to do.
Yes, and you can see across the business spectrum those businesses that are more diamond managed, if you will, versus those that are in the mindset at Square. The mindset at Square just basically closed its doors and went on holiday or lockdown. Diamond, they look at, well, let's see, we've got this capacity, maybe we can become a takeout service, or how can we utilize what we have and repurpose what we've got so that we can actually still keep viable and just, shift lanes and move with the flow and move with the tide and be still operational.
So in some ways, people at Diamond are thriving in the current situation because they can innovate and find ways to work against the constraints of the lockdown situation. But in other ways, people at Diamond are being very challenged by this situation. And one of the ways they're being challenged is because, as we said earlier, this is a mental terrain. The reflection-based terrain is about, I will feel safe if I can control the world from my mind. And as a result, it's an incredible terrain of innovation and ingenuity and ideas and passionately held beliefs. But the downside of it is that there's a lot of mental busyness. So you'll find a lot of people at Diamond learning and studying meditation as a way to try and calm their mind. It's very, very common to find people at this terrain meditating. And at the current moment in time, when people are unable to go out, unable to distract themselves with events and social events, the world has quietened down.
The busyness that has been taken over everybody's lives, rushing here and there, has now had to stop. People have had to go sit at home because they've been locked down. And what has this caused? It's caused a real quieting in the environment. Even geologists and seismologists have noticed that the earth is not shivering and shaking as much as it used to. So it's palpable, this shift.
And for someone who's in the pocket of Diamond, like in the really main part of the Diamond journey where they're learning innovation and identity and uniqueness and beliefs and all the stuff that they're learning, to be suddenly thrown into a moment in time where there's no distraction can be very, very disconcerting. It's hard to stay stimulated and distracted and to keep the mind busy in a situation where the world is slowed down. Whereas someone who is moving from diamond to circle, so they've started the journey, they're in the valley of diamond, they're climbing up this mountain towards the next valley, which is circle, the connection-based terrain. Somebody who's moving on that journey is already starting to move from the mind into the heart, and their whole life is starting to slow down and simplify, and they're coming more from a state of doing to a state of being. So we're noticing that our friends at Diamond who are already in that process of moving to circle, at the moment, this current coronavirus situation is accelerating that shift for them, because the external situation is actually forcing them to shift from doing to being and from the mind to the heart, and to slow down and to step into stillness. Whereas the people who are really still in the valley of diamond, in the pocket of diamond, in the real grip of the deep learnings and exciting learnings of this terrain, are not yet at that point in their journey, which is fine because there's amazing gifts to be found at the reflection-based terrain. But those people are being much more challenged by the fact that the world has slowed down. So we just have to have some compassion for people who are really in the valley of diamond, who are at the reflection-based terrain, who are having to deal internally with the challenge of trying to remain mentally stimulated at a time in history when everything has completely stopped. And that's a really big one for some people at diamond. So everybody, you can see that people at the reflection-based terrain diamond are dealing with this coronavirus situation very differently than people at the order-based terrain square are dealing with it. And in our next video, we're going to discuss how people at the connection-based terrain circle are dealing with the coronavirus situation, because they are actually dealing with it in a completely different way from the people at diamond and the people at square. Because every different terrain of consciousness has a very different relationship with reality. Its core reactions, its core needs are very, very different. So get ready for that video, guys. It's going to be really interesting.
Thank you. We'll see you then.